Have we reached the final stages of the Gaza war? Are the hostages actually going to come home? And is Trump being bribed by Qatar? All this and above in the next episode of the Meira K Show. Did any of you notice how there was no hostage video released on Saturday night? And no, this is not bad news. This is good news because those videos are always psychological propaganda to try and get the Israelis riled up. But it is a sign, more than anything, that the pressure that we are applying to Hamas is working. We've had eliminations this week, a crazy Middle East visit by Trump, the intensifying of the military operations in Gaza, and boy, oh boy, are they intensifying. We've got a review of the Eurovision, which was absolutely superb. Idan Alexander came home, Judea and Samaria, politics happening here in Israel. We also want to let you know that we're now taking sponsorships for the show. So if you want to get in front of tens of thousands of people who support Israel, support America, and support the Jewish people, this is your time. Email info@meirak.com and let's dive right in. So first and foremost, over the weekend, Operation Gideon Chariots kind of unofficially started. And what does that mean? Well, we've been saying for the last few months that there's going to be a much more intensified military operation in Gaza, in which every step that we take, we are not giving back to the Palestinians. And this has been an area of controversy. You've probably seen everywhere people talking about it. Is this a good thing or a bad thing? But that operation has now finally started. And I can't tell you what a relief that is as an Israeli. Now, obviously, a war starting is really scary. And we've been at war for 2 years, but the war we've been at has kind of been a middle ground, okay? We've gone in, we've tried to do things, we've come out. Now we have upped the pressure to such an intense level that the Palestinians are freaking out, and more importantly, Hamas are freaking out. And how do we know this? Well, because they are back on the hostage negotiation table. Not only are we intensifying military operations, not only is Trump really pushing the pressure on Qatar, but in addition, we have eliminated, and although it's not yet confirmed, it's pretty much confirmed, we have eliminated the new head of Hamas, which is the Sinwar brother, okay? We eliminated the first Sinwar, the guy that was behind October 7th, and his brother took his replacement, and now we've hopefully eliminated him in a crazy intense strike this week. And he is really the guy who has been pulling against the hostage negotiations. He's the one who's not been allowing to Hamas to kind of move forward with discussions. And now that he's basically out of the picture in what was revealed as a successful operation that we discovered when Idan Alexander was released. So I know it's crazy to think that it's just been a week, but literally this time last week, it was announced that Idan Alexander, an American hostage, was going to be let free in exchange for nada. And that's what happened. The next day, he was finally released due to pressure from Trump. And this created a whole hullabaloo here in Israel because people freaked out a little bit that the American hostage was going to be released and that there was no Israelis being released in the same deal. And that's a really scary thing for Israelis to understand, that maybe being Israeli is not enough to get out of hostage situations. And you can imagine the fear that put in everybody who doesn't have an extra passport. But the government came in really strongly saying that is not the case. Obviously, Trump is going to negotiate for the American because he has more interest in that. But the pressure is on to get all of the Israelis home, every single one of them. And that's exactly what's being discussed right now. And Hamas seems just a little bit more likely because, as we said from the beginning, intense military operations, no aid. Absolutely no aid into Gaza, and the targeted elimination of the decision makers in Gaza works. In addition, Trump was in Qatar this week in that heavily discussed trip to the Middle East. And whilst he was there, he clearly put pressure on them. He clearly put pressure on Qatar to do what they can to get a deal on the table. And it seems like something might be happening. Now, it's too early to say that something will, but it is clear that this new military operation really means business. This is not the same as what we have experienced up until this point. Just in the last 24 hours, we've seen more intense military operations, more intense bombings and air force and internal military operations than we have since the beginning of the war. And this, my friends, is such a good sign because there is a fatigue here in Israel. It's been almost 2 years of this war, and there is such a feeling of, why are we sending our soldiers in if we're not actually getting anywhere? This operation is supposed to change that. We've got new leadership in place. We've got a new administration, and we have got a fire in the belly of our soldiers who are going out there. We are finally saying enough is enough. Everything in the Middle East needs to change, and that starts with Gaza, because the truth is, Israel is the definition of what happens here in the Middle East, okay? That might sound like a kind of vague statement, but it's really true. The Middle East, the Islamic states, they test everything that they want to do on Western societies, starting right here with Israel, because we're a mini democracy in the heart of the Middle East, which is really not a democratic state. And so what we're going to do with Gaza is going to be a really clear indicator as to what's going to happen with the rest. And we have shifted strategies. We've spoken about that a lot on the podcast. The way we have done things up until this point cannot continue. And so I think everybody's kind of feeling this energy in the air. Please, 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 can these Gaza military operations actually lead us somewhere? And obviously, this brings us to the complicated questions of the hostages. But what we are seeing, what we are really, really seeing is that this pressure on Hamas is leading them to being interested in talks. When Idan Alexander was released, there was a whole conversation of, well, is this just because of Trump? Or is this because of the military pressure? And the truth is, it's a combination. They're petrified of Trump. They are absolutely petrified of him. But more importantly, Trump giving them this ultimatum, and honestly, in a funny way, this kind of seemingly fight between Israel and Trump online, which is not real. It's not reality. And we're going to talk about that in the next segment. But this seeming fight between them has kind of given Hamas this ego ability to say, okay, we're going to release a hostage for nothing. Okay. And that's a big part of what happened with Idan Alexander. He was released for nothing. And we have to remember that everybody talks about the pressure on the government and America and all these other countries that should have been releasing. But Hamas, at the end of the day, they could just release however many hostages they want if they just decided to. And that's an important point because we get so stuck in the details of what we should negotiate and what we should be compromising and what we should be giving. And we could just remember that if Hamas wanted to, they could give us everything for free. And then it's a question of how we make Hamas want to. And that is through military power. Okay, if Hamas realize that there's just no chance for their survival and Israel has given up on trying to make the West happy and is not listening to the protests internal to the country or external to the country, then they are going to realize that their end is coming near. And if their end is coming near, then maybe they'll actually agree to give us the hostages. And that is the strategy that we are seeing is actually working. Idan Alexander was not just released because of Trump pressure. He was released under the guise of that because it allowed for Hamas to kind of show up and pretend that they're doing it just for Trump. But in reality, the military pressure, they are petrified. And you can see this on all the Arab channels. Scroll through them. You'll see video after video after video. People are really, really afraid because they understand that for the first time since the beginning of this war, Israel means business. On the topic of respect, we need to talk about this Trump visit to the Middle East because whilst we don't really want to get too much into Trump politics and American politics, this trip was a reshape of the Middle East and it was a phenomenal thing to see. And I don't mean this as a personal opinion. I think it was actually a masterful act of understanding from Trump's administration how the Middle East works. You see, something that the West has forgotten over the last 2 years is that the Middle East works in terminologies of respect, okay? Hamas respect Trump, which is why they are willing to do things for Trump. And Saudi Arabia, Qatar, etc., these are all Arabian cultures in which respect is the highest currency. I once had a really interesting conversation with somebody after a speech. I gave a speech to a delegation that was coming into Israel, a diplomatic delegation, and we were talking about everything that's going on and how to really put pressure on Qatar. And one of the people came up to me and said, the way to put pressure on Qatar is to humiliate them, to tell them that we are going to expose information about them. And I thought that was a really interesting statement to make because it's not what I would think about. But he told me, and it's lived in my head ever since then, that in the world of respect, that is how you negotiate. The more power you show, the more people respect you, and the less power you show, the less they respect you. And that is what is happening right now. So Trump goes to the Middle East. He goes to visit Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Emirates, and everyone in Israel freaks out. And we discussed on the podcast last week that there was no reason to freak out because this was not a snub at Israel. And to prove that, by the way, it's been announced that J.D. Vance is coming to Israel in 2 days, just to prove that the administration is happy and connected to Israel and there's no real issues here. But this was not a snub at Israel. It was actually a focus on something completely different. It was a focus on trying to broker peace with some of the biggest players in the Middle East. And believe it or not, that is not Israel. We're a small country. We don't have a massive budget. Saudi Arabia, Qatar, the United Emirates, they are the real big players here. And we just tend to forget about them because we're so focused on Israel. But Trump hasn't because he's understand that these are really good financial allies to America. And more importantly, they have a common enemy. What unites Trump and Saudi Arabia? Well, two things. Number one, the financial side of things. They both like money and they both really, really want to broker deals to grow investments. But number two, they both hate Iran and they hate terrorism. And so this trip to these countries had two main points to it. Number one, to broker amazing deals, financial deals. And that's what happens. I mean, these deals are historic. We're talking about trillions and trillions of dollars of investment between the two countries. But number two, it was a chance to show the world what peace in the Middle East looks like, and they offered an olive branch to Yemen, Syria, and to Iran. This is what Trump said in what was a beautiful speech, a very, very eloquent speech, a speech that really showed his understanding of the Middle East. He got up in front of millions of people and he basically said, look, Saudi Arabia, you guys are a beautiful country and we respect you. We have deference for you. You are what the future of the Middle East looks like. And we want a part of that and we want to be connected. We know we're different, but there's so much aligned and we should be great allies. And then he turned to Iran and he made it very, very, very clear. For all the people who have been worried about the Iran nuclear deal, Trump has been very clear over the last few days. You have been given a chance to broker freedom. You have been given a chance to sign a peace deal. You have been given a chance to build a great land for your people. And if you don't take up that chance, we are going to come in militarily. This is what he said again to Syria and Yemen. He made this interesting statement being like, the United States, even if we weren't friends in the past, we are happy to make peace. And it's showing that this new kind of mentality of Trump in which he is saying, I want to end the wars. I am not interested in wars. I'm interested in financial growth. That's what I want. That's what's possible. And the Middle East, we are now offering a shift. If you are a country that has been fraught with war over the last few years, you can change that and we will help it. We will lift the sanctions, which he did on Syria. We will broker a peace deal, which he did with the Houthis. Never mind the fact that the Houthis kept on attacking Israel during that time, but that's a side statement. We will sign a nuclear deal with Iran, which again, the clauses of it are not so clear. As long as you guys agree to start emulating what Saudi Arabia has done in comparison to what Iran has done. And that's going to be a very interesting thing for us to be watching over the next few months. How does the new Middle East look? And if this is making you feel a little bit uncomfortable because of the Qatar plane fiasco, okay, then I'm with you. And I just want to kind of break down and pinpoint what might be bothering you a little bit. So as you probably heard at this point, Qatar offered this like $400 million, $400 million plane to Trump as a present. Okay. And people freaked. Why? Because Qatar funded Hamas. Qatar funded all of the drama that happened on campuses over the last few months. Okay. Qatar are really a terrorist state that are just dripping in money. And so people are feeling a little bit like, Trump, what are you doing? Why are you taking their money? And I think it's a really important conversation for us to have. You see, there are two different philosophies in the Islamic world, and both of them aim for world domination. And there's no nice way around it. We've got the Iran side of things that believes we're going to get to world domination through terror, through attacks, etc. And then we've got the more Saudi Arabia, Qatar perspective, which is we're going to get to world domination through financial strength, through beauty, and through, honestly, branding and manipulation. They are two different perspectives. And up until this point, the one that's warranted a lot of attention is Iran, because they're always involved. The Islamic Republic is always involved in doing these terror attacks, and they make a lot of noise. But the truth is, you've got this other side with Saudi Arabia, Qatar, who are dripping in money and fancy buildings and beautiful fashion and unbelievable branding, right? If you've gone to Dubai, I mean, it's a sight to behold. But they both have, at the end of the day, a similar long-term goal. And within Islam, there's an idea that you can broker peace, so to speak, a fake level of peace with countries that you consider infidels, i.e. the West, if it's part of a longer-term strategy in which eventually we'll be able to Islamify those countries, okay? So what we're seeing right now is Saudi Arabia and Qatar it's beautiful, it's amazing, it's a very important shift in what's happening in the Middle East, but it's actually at its root a little bit scarier. It's a little bit scarier because we know what their end goal is. Their end goal is to make the whole world an Islamic state. And so on that point, we're going to bring back the segment Meira Reads a Book, because this book is really, really important if you want to understand what we're talking about. So this is a book by Melanie Phillips called The Builder's Stone. And in this book, she talks about the importance of us returning to religion of all things to be able to deal with the problem of Islam in the long term. Okay, so it's called The Builder's Stone, How Jews and Christians Built the West and Why Only They Can Save Them. And I found this book to be fascinating. It's a bit of a harder read. It's a nuanced read, and you have to really, really delve into it. But the idea is like this. Religion gets a bad rep. Okay, religion is something that we look at as like a spiritual heebie-jeebie, lots of rules. But actually, the idea of religion at its root is the beginning of morality. Okay, it's a book of what the Bible is a book of not stories, but what is right versus what is wrong. And the entire Western society is built on the ideas of good versus bad. Okay, now it happens to be that there are two main types of religions in the world. We've got, well, there's a bunch more. That's not correct. But right now in this war between Israel and the Palestinians, so to speak, or the Islamic Republic, we've got more Western ideals, ideals that believe in peace and humanity. This book really talks about how you've got Judean Christian ideals that the West has kind of lost, okay? Morality, what's right versus what's wrong. And then you've got the Islamic countries that are very, very, very clear on their religion. They are very clear on what they believe in, but what they believe in is completely different to what the West believes in. Whilst the West believes in peace and individual rights, Islam doesn't. And she talks in here about how October 7th exposed the fact that the West has completely lost its direction, and how actually returning to religious ideals, again, not to being religious, so to speak, but to understanding what Judaism's about, what Christianity is about, is going to be so imperative in this war. If these Islamic countries understand their ideals, that's the kind of conquering that we're going to end up reaching. And I highly, highly, highly recommend it if you're interested in understanding where we went wrong as a Western society and how we can change it, because there is a change to be had. And so this kind of big ultimate fight between a world dominated by Islam or a world dominated by Western society is going to be a big question. And whilst I don't know how I feel about the Qatar plane, because, well, actually I do. I know how I feel about it. I don't like it, but I think it's also a positive that instead of this happening under the carpet, it's something that people know about. You know, this is what Qatar's plan is. They want to manipulate the West into believing that we are all friends and buddies. We are not, but we do have a united enemy. We do have Iran. And if we can stop the Middle East being a terror-ridden regime, that's going to be a positive thing for everybody. But we do still have to remember that Qatar are not our friends. They are an enemy, and they do have different ideals to the Western ideals. And that is really important that we keep at the forefront, even if they have the most amazing buildings in the whole entire world. And so this trip was really, really, really important for many, many reasons, but is also leaving a lot of Israelis kind of uncertain. And my opinion and belief is that it's not that we should be uncertain that America is kind of dropping us, because that is absolutely not the case. And we've got so much proof of that, but rather that the Middle East is going to be shifting away from terror and into something that's much more financial. But the problems here are problems that could potentially stay in the long term. And so we need to all be focusing on that, thinking about that. And the answer to that in many ways is the strengthening of our own ideals, so that come the day, if there is ever a reckoning between the two, we know where we stand and we know what we fight for. And I think that's what we're seeing in Israel. A real strong feeling that we know where we stand. We know what's important. The Gazans need to be removed from the land. Okay, that's clear at this point. There was rumors that Libya is going to take in 1 million Palestinians, and we don't yet know if that's true, but it's looking a little bit like hocus pocus at the moment. But there needs to be a change. The apologetic Jew, the era of that is over, and it's now the time for the unapologetic Jew to come up, to stand up, and to push forward. That's what we're seeing in Gaza, but I don't want to talk about Gaza right now. I actually want to talk about Judea and Samaria, which, as some of you have called me out in the comments, I sometimes call the West Bank, and you're absolutely correct. Not because I ideologically believe with the word the West Bank, which has negative connotations, but rather because I talk to a big audience and who often don't know what Judea and Samaria is. So if that's you, let me just say right here, right now, the West Bank and Judea and Samaria are the same thing, but Judea and Samaria is the correct terminology, okay? And this week we had a terrible terror attack of a female, okay? She was 30 years old. Her name was Tzila. She was on the way to give birth to her baby when a terrorist came, attacked the car. She was killed basically immediately. They managed to save the baby, but he's in terrible condition, and so we need to pray for him. And the husband was always also injured. She left 3 children at home, and I want to talk about Judea and Samaria for a second, because there's kind of been a consensus around this problem. We have our land, and in the heart of it, we've got the West Bank. i.e. Judea and Samaria. And in Judea and Samaria, there are millions of Palestinian/Arab Israelis who are really enemies of the state, okay? They are kind of like the Palestinians in Gaza, but they live within Israel. And there's so much bad rep. We have all of these different blockades and they're not allowed out and all of these different things. But I want to talk about the fact that a very interesting statistic came out in the last few weeks, which is there have been over 6,000 attacks. 6,000 attacks. That equates to about 20 a day on Israeli citizens in Israel from the people who live in Judea and Samaria, the Arabs there. These people really, really don't want Israelis living in Israel. They want to own the land. This is the same problem that we've got in Gaza, but tenfold, because Gaza's a really small portion on our borders. The West Bank is enormous, and the Jewish communities and the Arab communities are intertwined in a crazy, crazy labyrinth. And the Jews of Judea and Samaria are constantly under attack, but there is no media reporting on this. You know what the media does report about, obviously, is settler violence, which is rubbish, because the idea of settlers means you're settling in a land that isn't yours. Israel is ours. Israel is the Jewish people's. It is not the Palestinians under any circumstances. And so the fact that we call them settlers is insane. Whilst the whole conversation of settler violence, so to speak, is a conversation for another time, the problem in Judea and Samaria is really, really serious. And our Jews, besides the fact that I believe have the right to fight back, I want to highlight the fact that they're really, really suffering and struggling during this time in a real, real way. They're being attacked daily. And this attack on a pregnant woman on her way to the delivery room is just a showcase of this. The fact that there needs to be a change, just like it took us 2 years to realize that there needs to be a shift in how we approach Gaza, there needs to be a shift in how we approach Judea and Samaria. And I'm not exactly sure what that shift is, but it's coming and it needs to come really, really soon. The really crazy thing is that 6,000 attacks is actually a miraculous number. Keep in mind that you've got millions of these Palestinians that want all of us dead, okay? That's what they want. There's only been 6,000 attacks. That's a success. But it's so warped and wrong. And so there needs to be a solution. And my heart goes out to the community of Tzila who has to suffer this for no good reason. And to all the people out there living in Judea and Samaria who have been fighting for so long to get their story out there and have just been condemned for being settlers. That is not the case. That's not what's going on. These are Jews living in the Israeli land, our sovereign land. All of it should be Israel. It's not disputed. It shouldn't be disputed. And I think we're going to see a change in the administration very soon, where they kind of change the wording from the West Bank to Judea Samaria and allow for us to say, this is our sovereign land. We are not occupiers. This is not illegal. This is our home. But more importantly, anyone who doesn't believe it is out. I feel so strongly the way we treat the Gazans and the Palestinians, that's the way we have to treat the West Bank. They cannot be allowed to continue to do what they're doing. And we've seen a little bit of that this week. We've seen the IDF go in and take out in Tulkarm, which is a refugee camp, so to speak, ammunition base that had hundreds of explosives. We've also hopefully received news this morning that the person who killed Tzila has been caught/eliminated, but we're not sure it's them. We have to see a shift. We have to see a change. And I'm hoping that in the next year we will see that change. Look, Netanyahu has called out what's going on in Gaza and has made it clear that there is going to be this shift. He has just said, we're not giving up the military operation. Even if there is a hostage negotiation or release, we're going to kind of move forward with a military operation regardless. And I want that kind of statement for Judea and Samaria. I want to see the change in the narrative. Trump has kind of given us the go-ahead to run our land the way it should be, and Judea and Samaria can't be left out of this package. They just can't, because it is the heart of the homeland and it is more important than ever. So those were the main big topics that were going on. We've got the Judea Samaria attack, Idan Alexander being released, everything going on with Trump in the Middle East. But obviously in Israel, there's so much more going on. So let's review the Eurovision for a second, because that was amazing. For those unfamiliar with what the Eurovision is, it's a big music contest here in Europe. Now, when I say here in Europe, it's kind of ironic because Israel is not really part of Europe. I think we're officially part of Asia, but maybe we're also part of the Middle East. Part of the identity of being a Jew, I guess Israel, I don't even know which continent we're actually part of. But Israel has always been part of the Eurovision, and it is a highly political and controversial music show. It's nothing more than that. It's always been kind of a showcase of really liberal ideology at the end of the day. They kind of make this the most flamboyant show in the whole world. And Israel's always been apart, but this show at its essence is very, very political. And what I loved about last night in Yuval Rafael's performance, which was obviously amazing. I mean, this is to think that she is just 6 months into her music career, that she wasn't singing 6 months ago. It just blows your mind. But she got up there. She gave the show of her life. She yelled at the end, Am Yisrael Chai, the Jewish people are eternal, which is just absolutely beautiful. But she did this not only to immense boos from the crowd, immense boos, which actually had to be muted out of the recording. They were so bad. But also to crazy protests going on outside, like they were burning American flags. Why they're burning American flags makes no sense. But the Palestinians, these pro-Palis, they're just a little bit deranged. And they're burning Israeli flags. Israelis that were in Switzerland for this show were told to kind of keep it on the down low, which I'm really against. Like, don't have the Israeli government telling Israelis to hide the fact they're Israeli. Showcase it with pride, but I guess it's a security precaution and part of this kind of apologetic Jew, which I'm massively against. But she goes on that stage, she gives a performance of her life, and the entire world basically agrees. But this show is super political, as we've mentioned. And so every one of the judges, their votes for Israel were seen as like, oh, we're voting for the Israeli state. It means that we're in agreement. So they basically wouldn't give her votes. The judges voted way, way, way below what she should have been receiving. But guess who didn't? The people, the populations of the countries came at Yuval Rafael and they gave her such high scoring. She came in the highest by like a mile. I think the person who had the highest popular vote was 100 and then Yuval Rafael had like 250 or something like that. And she came in second place, which was amazing. And I think this is such an important reminder because we have all these politicians and all the media and all these people on the top echelons of society being like, oh, Israel's the worst, Israel's the worst. But the majority of the people have totally got our back. And I think that's what you viewers are seeing as well. And you talk about and comment in the videos. Israel has so much support. People watching this Yuval Rafael, this girl who's hid for 8 hours under 40 bodies, survived Nova, came out there to sing a song about how the Jewish people are beautiful and a new day will rise and the future is great. People adored it. People loved it. So she came in second place, which is better than any of us had dreamed. And it, I guess, makes more sense than being first place because if you win first place, the show has to be in your country. And I can't imagine the Eurovision taking place in Israel right now. But that was great. That was amazing and a super exciting way to start the week. And obviously, as this was happening, the Houthis fired a missile at us. But you know what? They're kind of reaching irrelevancy as Israel keeps on attacking them. And boy, oh boy, are we attacking them. We're taking this very, very seriously. The Houthis are being destroyed at the moment, but they are a force to be reckoned with, okay? They're a serious force. And so, yes, over the last few weeks, we have spent so much time in bomb shelters, which is getting a little tiresome, but it's okay because I don't think that the Houthis are going to exist for very much longer if Israel continues in the way that it's continuing. In addition, we've got some sad news with the death of Igor Pivnev, okay? And I want to highlight the story because I think it's important in the light of music competitions and exciting things going on. The country is really suffering from a mental toll. Igor was a policeman who went down on October 7th and saved a few people, and unfortunately, he took his life this week, which is unbelievably heartbreaking to realize that we're in the midst of a war and people are really in the midst of just trying to kind of deal with the current insanity of what's happening. But there is such a mental toll. There's mental tolls on families, on parents, on children, and on individuals from October 7th. So many survivors of Nova have been hospitalized, unfortunately. So many survivors of terror are hospitalized, and it's not just about hospitalization. It's about the silent war, the PTSD war, the things that people are going on inside as a ramification for this war. And I think we really need to just spend some time understanding this as a country. PTSD awareness has grown tremendously in Israel. Something that was never, ever discussed. It's becoming more and more normative. And whilst that's a positive, it's also a reminder that we need real infrastructure in place to help the mental health crisis here in Israel. And I'm not seeing enough focus on this, not from our government, not legislative-wise, and not as a society. How do we help the individuals? There have been so many initiatives to, yes, help them. Nova survivors have been flown across the world and people have been celebrated and donations, etc. But this is a much deeper issue and it's something that we're going to have to really tackle as a society. And I'm afraid we're going to see a lot more. So I just want to take a second to think about the people who are suffering silently and hope and pray that they are sent the help that they need so that we don't have to have more suicide stories. Sending so much love to Igor's family, and I hope and a prayer that this is the last suicide victim of this war. In addition, if we're talking about diplomatic stuff, we've got this really weird video. Did any of you guys see this video? From Macron, who went to meet Erdogan, and we know that Turkey and Israel are, kind of not doing so well right now. But we spoke about respect at the beginning of this episode, and I find this so interesting. So Macron went to meet with Erdogan, and Macron's in Israel not being perceived as a great person right now because he's come out pushing forward stupid old ideas like a two-state solution or rewarding the Palestinians for October 7th with a state, which is something that Israel's never going to agree to. And the relations between Israel and France are a little bit rocky, but he goes to meet with Erdogan, I don't know, to go kiss butts of these Palestinian terrorist people out there. He handshakes Erdogan. Okay, just watch this video for a second. How weird. Erdogan, basically in a show of power, is holding on to Macron's finger. Ew, so creepy. But he's holding on to him as a show of like, you're not going to mess with me. Let's show the power. And I think this brings us back to this kind of topic of respect and this really, honestly, like undignified perspective that the West has taken, specifically France, of trying to like kiss the butts, for lack of better terminology, of these Arab leaders who just see it as so undignified. So Israel and France are a little bit in dispute. And interestingly enough, French people are buying up real estate in Israel like crazy because they're realizing there isn't really a future for the Jews of France. And that is really sad. But the truth is, if Europe doesn't shape up its game, it doesn't shape it up. And this is actually something that the Build to Stone talks about. If they don't shape up and change their perspective on how they're dealing with the Islam issue, then this is going to be the future of Jews everywhere. They're going to end up coming to Israel, and the end of Europe is nearer than you think. So let's hope and pray that the European leaders actually have some sense and decide to stop sucking up to these terrible leaders and actually have some dignity. In addition, we've also got Haredi drama, okay? Haredim are the ultra-Orthodox, and we've spoken about a little bit how there's so much drama going on with Haredim not being drafted, and the head of the IDF, okay, has basically come out saying, we are going to arrest any Haredi who doesn't draft, which, as you can imagine, created such panic in the Haredi parties, and they're threatening, actually at this point, threatening to pull out of the coalition. It's been quiet for a few days, but this is something that we're going to watch because Netanyahu's shifted strategy a little bit. He has not jumped in to say, okay, Haredim, don't worry, we're going to do everything in our power to resolve this issue. He's a little bit told the Haredim to kind of back off, but the IDF coming in and creating more drama by making these crazy statements is not helping Netanyahu politically, and so we're going to watch that because it could very possibly lead to a falling apart of the government. But don't worry yet, because that's not exactly the only possibility. If the Haredim leave, there could still be a chance that the left-wing parties join into the government to save it, which is unlikely, but we're going to wait and watch this because if the IDF actually start arresting Haredim left, right, and center, there is going to be mayhem in this country. Instead of kind of leaving this to the political echelons, which is something we spoke about last week, should the IDF be making their own decisions or should they be listening to the government? And here right now, this is a decision made by the IDF, which is causing a lot of drama for the government, and it was probably not so wise. So we're going to be watching that one closely. Additionally, we're watching the ICC. Okay, so these legacy organizations, and God, like, please, I mean, Trump, can you just go in and remove them? Like the UN, the ICC, all these organizations are just so corrupt and taking so much money. But the story of Karim Khan, okay, the guy who was behind the arrest warrants on Netanyahu and Gallant, he's literally like publicly admitted now that he did it just to keep his position, just for political gain. And for people who are not aware, Karim Khan has been accused of a sexual assault situation with one of his employees, and she was a pro-Palestinian. And according to her, she came out saying that Karim Khan came to her and said, look, if you pursue these sexual allegations against me, who's going to go after the Netanyahu? Who's going to save the Palestinians? And now Karim has literally agreed that he fabricated these things to stay in power. And so he's kind of been quietly pushed out of the organization. But these organizations need to end. Like, there's so much money being flooded. Like, the UN condemns Israel left, right, and center, never condemns anyone else for nothing. There is literally nothing to be gained, just billions and billions of dollars being sent to these organizations who have their own political motivations, and they are never for the good of the world. So I'm just all for the end. Like, let's doge the living daylights out of these organizations and just end them. Like, Karim Khan's one example, but I'm sure that there are hundreds more examples of corruption. And talking about corruption, we've got the Attorney General with more drama as it comes out that she was probably in a relationship with one of the main persecutors of Netanyahu in his trial, which is the reason why she didn't pull the trial to begin with, which he had the power to do. Had the Attorney General at the beginning of this whole Netanyahu drama pulled out and said there shouldn't be these lawsuits, then the lawsuits would have ended and Netanyahu wouldn't be on trial at the same time as this massive war. So whatever. She's in trouble for that. She's in so much trouble that the Supreme Court, which we know is so corrupt here in Israel, has actually called upon her and told her, like, given her an ultimatum and said, you have to present the evidence of what's going on. Are you in a relationship? And so she's in hot water, and hopefully, potentially, this will mean that she'll be able to be out of the government ASAP, because she shouldn't be here anymore. Once again, we managed to squeeze so much information into one episode. I don't know how we do it. At this point, I think we're going to have to start doing many more shows because so much is happening. But hopefully you enjoyed. Submit your questions below if you're still with us on what's going on. What are things that we can clarify for you? And we will hopefully touch upon them next week. We'll also have another book segment, so let us know if there is a book that you would like reviewed. And on that note, I'm Meira, and I will see you next time.